Hello and welcome, listeners, to the true iteration of That's a Good Card. I'm Ya, and with me is my handsome co-host, Kyle. Kyle will have the challenge of getting me to say, "That's a good card." While Kyle will be doing the convincing, I'll be playing the devil's advocate. Now is also a good time to remind you to hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to us. You may also disagree with me and agree with Kyle, so leave a comment below to let us know. Or you can suggest the card you think can change the CEDH meta. All right, Kyle, let's get started.
All right, thanks for the wonderful compliment in the introduction.
Anytime, bud.
Had me laughing during the intro. I actually want to take this time to also remind our listeners that we launched our Patreon last week. So if you're interested in getting some bonus content, right now we have a full podcast loaded into the Patreon, The Lost Podcast. It's a blast, and if you're interested in that, check out the links to our Patreon down below. All right, let's get into today's card, which was actually recommended to us by someone I got the pleasure of playing against in Fishbowl 4. So this card was brought to us by Jason, who got a couple of wins in Fishbowl playing this card in their Tymna Kraum list.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So today's card is Psychic Frog. It's been making waves in Modern recently, and let me just tell you about this card. So Psychic Frog is a 2-cost card. It is 1 blue pip, 1 black pip, so it's Dimir. It is a creature, frog. It is a 1 power, 2 toughness creature, and it says, whenever Psychic Frog deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, draw a card. There's a second ability that says, discard a card, put a 1/1 counter on Psychic Frog. That's an activated ability. The cost is discarding a card, and you get to put a 1/1 counter on Psychic Frog. And the last ability is exile 3 cards from your graveyard. Psychic Frog gains flying until the end of turn. Once again, that's an activated ability that says exile 3 cards from your graveyard, and Psychic Frog gains flying until the end of turn. And the flavor text reads, some frogs poison the body. Some frogs poison the mind.
That's a good one.
So the Psychic Frog's licking you and licking your brains.
Oh, God. Oh, God.
Oh, God. All right, so let's talk about where this card is seeing play in CEDH. Looking at CEDH analytics, we see that there's only 12 lists that we see running this card right now, which kind of makes sense given that this card's pretty dang new. So we see it in Tymna Kraum, Tymna Thrasios, and a couple of other random lists here and there. So it doesn't see a ton of play quite yet, but look, if this card's getting wins at one of the biggest CEDH tournaments that the West Coast has ever seen, if not the biggest, I think, might be the biggest West Coast.
Was the
then,
biggest.
You know, it was the biggest on the West Coast, and they're probably going to break that record again next year.
Yep.
So shout out Fishbowl. But I think that if this card is able to see some success in a Tymna Kraum list there, then it's something we should talk about. So you ready to get into my positives?
Hell yeah, let's go.
All right. So my first point about the Psychic Frog is that it's like Diet Tymna, like Walmart Tymna, the Kroger brand Tymna, the market value Tymna.
Tymna at home?
It's Tymna at home. So look, we all know that Tymna the Weaver is an incredible card. Go to combat, attack, and draw cards. Great, we love that. And Psychic Frog kind of does the same thing. It's worse. I won't say strictly, because strictly doesn't exist in Magic the Gathering, but it's worse than Tymna. But that being said, Tymna is such an incredible card that being able to just go to combat every turn and consistently draw cards is something that is just incredibly powerful in our format. And the good thing about it, too, is this is CEDH, so we really don't see a ton of decks that are just like building out a big battleship board state. You're not going to see a ton of creatures at all times, and sometimes when you do see the decks that have a ton of creatures, they're swinging out every turn. So the ability for you to actually get through with damage with Psychic Frog is actually quite high, similar to how it is with Tymna. So expect to draw a card every turn from this card, and that alone, 2 mana draw a card every turn, seems pretty damn good to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's CEDH. We love drawing cards, and I think this card is one of those effects that we just love to see. I know that I'm also drawn to it, like judging by my card history. Like, this is a really neat card for a lot less mana cost, right? Like, you're only paying 2, a black and a blue pip. That's not bad at all.
Yep. It's 2/3 the cost. I don't know math.
2/3 the cost. You're right.
Fractions are tough, man. I was sitting over the kitchen table as I don't know what age you learned fractions, as a 7-year-old trying to figure it out. All right, let's get into my second point. The second point, the benefit for this card is that the discard effect is what makes this card OP. Like, the draw is pretty awesome, but the discard effect, the discard activated ability is gas. It's just so cool. And most notably, the two things that I think that can abuse this activated ability is, one, it feeds Breach, and two, Reanimator stuff. So we'll get into the Breach part first. Because you sometimes, like, let's talk Tymna Kraum or a Grixis list. Those Breach lines can get really thin sometimes. If you don't just immediately have that brain freeze where you can just feed cards into your graveyard, you're kind of struggling to get a couple of cards to be able to recast and pay that escape cost. So every time you're going through a Breach line, if you can't pay those 3 exiled cards to get what you want, you're going to be in trouble. So Psychic Frog allows you to feed more cards from your hand into your graveyard while you have Underworld Breach active, so you're actually able to complete your Underworld Breach line. And that was kind of the main point that Jason explained to me, was this can be used not only to draw cards, but it also fuels thin Breach lines. Like the Breach line where it's kind of looking dicey on whether or not you're going to be able to get through it. And luckily the Frog can come in clutch and kind of provide a way to dump your hand into your yard if you don't have LED or you don't have Brain Freeze available and you're kind of fishing for it with tutors. There's just a lot of ways that you can utilize fueling your Breach to tutor for the other pieces that make the line a lot simpler. The second part about this effect that makes it so powerful is I think we might start seeing it in some of like the Sultai lists that like to do Reanimator stuff.
Yeah.
Or maybe even like a Kenrith control list that is playing a Reanimator package. I think that this card's pretty hot for that. You know, activate Psychic Frog, the thing that you've been drawing cards with every turn. Put a Razaketh to the bin, put a Villas to the bin, put a Holebreaker Horde, Conch Sphinx, whatever you want, bin whatever you want, cast Reanimate, get whatever you want. And I think that that's something that's underutilized in the format, is just kind of Reanimator packages in general. And I've even been slightly kind of slowly brewing some kind of Talion Reanimator package because I think it would be pretty cool. But that's still in the lab. That's still cooking. So I won't get into that.
We're excited to see that.
but someday soon, TBD, we'll talk about that. But I do think that Psychic Frog can kind of help any list that includes blue-black that is going to want to fill the yard with good cards.
Yeah, I really kind of like this type of effect. I played for a little while a Tymna Jessica list that utilized creatures kind of like this one, where the activation for that was to discard a card, and it came up more often than not, right? Where you kind of wanted to just entomb something, but lo and behold, the thing you want to entomb is already in your hand. So it's like, well, let me just put this World Gorger Dragon. That's right, 2024. I was playing World Gorger Dragon.
Banger.
Let me just dump this into the graveyard and then see what kind of happens, right? That is a really cool activation that I particularly like on a creature, for sure.
My logical brain says the card draw effect is what makes this card good, but my Giga brain is saying that the discard effect is what makes this card even better. It just separates it from other card draw effects. The ability to utilize it to fuel a win line or utilize it to get you some massive value that can lead to a win line.
Yep.
So that's the second point. The discard effect is awesome. My third point is that it has really good synergy with our good friend, Delney. So the Tymna Kraum list, Jason's Tymna Kraum list was running Delney because why not? You're already running Tymna. Delney's going to pop off with Tymna. And not only that, if you got Psychic Frog hitting and Tymna hitting and you have Delney out, you're drawing about 800 cards. And if you got 800 cards in your hand, then you're activating the discard effect of Psychic Frog over and over and over again.
If you got 800 cards in your hand, you may have also lost the game, actually. I'm not sure.
We don't know yet. Don't call a judge on me. Don't call a judge. But I'm just saying, I think that the synergy with cards that are already good that you're going to find in your list is what makes those fringe cards that we talk about go from being potential ads to like, oh, I'm already running these cards in this list. This is just going to make it even better. I love that shit. I love when cards just fit seamlessly into the deck. When there's some sort of printing that's just like, oh man, this is just good for my deck. I don't have to change things. I don't have to take a couple cards out and add more to make this line work better. It just fits. And I think that's kind of what we see with Psychic Frog, and I'm really stoked in general. As you can tell, I'm pretty hyped on this card.
Yeah, real fast. For those of you who are listening, to remind you, Delney says, creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. And also, if an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time.
Thank you for reading that, y'all. Yeah, so just like in general, it's a creature that doubles the triggers of your little creatures. So if you're going to draw 1 card off Psychic Frog and you have Delney out, now you're drawing 2 cards off Psychic Frog. Woohoo! Same with Tymna.
Assuming you haven't, something that you should definitely think about, don't just kind of like start discarding cards to put +1/+1 counters onto your frog, because once it becomes 3 power,
He'll be
does
too
not
big.
trigger with Delney. So definitely something to keep in mind.
For sure. So my 4th point, I'm kind of getting into the fringe points of why this card is so good, but I kind of like that you can potentially not die to like removal with Psychic Frog by discarding a card and adding counters. So like if Orcish Bowmaster comes down, they're like, damn, this Psychic Frog is just pissing me off. He's drawing a card every turn. You can just be like, nope, I'm going to discard a couple cards, make him bigger. He doesn't die.
Yep.
So that's another like fringe aspect of this card, and the discard point is it can keep itself alive. So if people are throwing down a Fire Covenant and you're like, I'm going to kill everything on the board, just put enough damage, you could just discard a card, keep it alive, you know? So the fact that it buffs itself is also just an awesome aspect of it. And lastly, my final point is we might as well talk about it. I guess it matters, but the final ability that gives it flying is like kind of, it's not bad. It's not good. It's pretty bad, but it's like kind of good. But at the same time, it's kind of bad for what we want the card for. So if we're trying to use the card to fuel our graveyards, we may not want to do this. But at the same time, it's kind of cool.
I think it's actually quite important, because when you look at it, one of the things, I don't like it. I agree with you. I don't think it's a great ability, but I wish it was reversed, right? Discard a card and give it flying rather than the +1/+1s, because I think that the giving it flying is going to come up way more, right? To have a creature that will draw you cards, being able to give it some kind of evasion is kind of like really important, right? And it's probably a lot of modern players, I would imagine, would almost kind of rather have the ability to kind of scoot around, like get over opponents' creatures, right?
Yeah. Well, they definitely balanced it for modern things.
Yeah, for sure.
If they swatch it, it would be even more
better,
broken,
right?
In a 2v2 format. Yeah,
right.
In 2v2 it'd be too broken. But this isn't a 2v2 podcast. This is CEDH.
No.
So, oh shit, I forgot. No. But that's my last point. Is just that that flying ability. It has a niche positive, and there's no downside to it. It's just there if you need it. So I think that's the last point. Is we'll give some credit to it. It can be potentially useful. Potentially. All right, those are my points, y'all. Are you ready to dig into Psychic Frog? Tell us your downsides.
Yeah, some of the things that people should consider, and maybe why we don't see it as much in some other decks is... I think the first point is a point that I read a lot when I brought a card that we shall not name to the podcast a couple months ago, that it's a bit slow. Now, granted, this is a pretty low cost, a low investment, only 2 mana, right, for kind of a similar effect that I talked about, like which was a 4 cost. So for 2 costs, you're not investing as much, but it has to wait a whole turn cycle for it to do something like the card draw, right? But I think Colin and I agree. Yeah. We kind of almost like the discard part better, right? Just being able to feed our graveyard with really hot, spicy cards.
Whatever.
Yeah, I think that's the part that's a really more. But I think when your average player starts and looks at this card, like that's the thing, the card draw, that first ability, that's the thing that's going to really kind of get their interest piqued.
Yeah, it's not a turbo card.
No, it's not a turbo.
It's gonna be slow. Yeah. So you're not gonna get any immediate value from playing this card. So I 100% see that, and it's the same thing with Tymna though. It's like yes, I guess if you have something else that's swinging, but if we're thinking like turn 1, because I mean Psychic Frog is 2 cost. It's coming down early.
Yeah.
It's going to come down turn 1 or turn 2. The likelihood that you have something that's already ready to attack is pretty low, even like for a Tymna deck. So I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's not uncommon for a Tymna Kraum to have like a turn 1
Just
Sarah's
like a
Angel.
dork or something like that.
Sarah's Angel.
Oh, Sarah Ascendant, you mean?
Sarah Ascendant,
Sarah
yeah.
Ascendant.
Sarah
Sarah
Ascendant.
Angel? That'd be broken turn 1. 4/4 flyer.
Sarah Ascendant, right, comes down turn 1 and is ready to swing turn 2 when Tymna comes down. And I think that's the upside of like a Tymna. Obviously, you could still play this turn 1 and then get swinging into one person. You get 2 cards is also like pretty common, right? Where you only have like by turn 2. You hope to have at least 2 opponents to attack into with a Tymna, but like sometimes it's only going to be 1. So this still nets you 2 cards, right? And that's the hope.
And while we're talking about it, we can kind of talk about how difficult that it would be to cast on turn 1. So like in theory, it's possible, but because it's 2 separate pips, it's definitely harder.
Yeah.
It's not like it's not a mana cryptable thing. No. Right, so it's not just like land, mana crypt, play the card, which kind of stinks. But you're gonna need a Chrome Mox. You're gonna need a Mox Diamond. You're gonna need literally anything else that's that's gonna be able to get you that second pip.
Correct.
Unfortunately, it's not in like green or red, so you can't even do like a Simian Spirit Guide or like an Elvish Spirit Guide to get it out turn 1. But it's a little more difficult than we would want to get out turn 1. And we talk about this a lot and just talking about like the castability of cards. So
it makes a big difference.
Yeah, it does make a big difference. And you want this card early. So I would say that in terms of difficulty to cast turn 1, I would put it at like a medium, right? It's not something super hard to cast, but I think it's not something that's easy to cast.
I agree. I completely agree. And so I think that kind of like brings up my second point a little bit, that because of the color choices of it being in black and blue, it kind of, I think part of it is like it narrows the decks that you get to kind of slot this thing into.
Yeah.
Yeah, like now you have to also be in Dimir, so you're looking at like you said, Tymna Kraums, maybe your Grixis
mid-range stuff. Soul Tie, which could unfortunately historically really bad in CEDH,
Correct.
But I'm hoping that it comes back.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, shout out all the Soul Tie players out there.
And when I look at this card, I immediately kind of thought of the other big frog, and like the frog, right? A Gitrog doesn't get to play this frog in it. Something that would feed its graveyard, which it totally wants, right? It totally wants, and it's so thematic, right? We love a good theme. Every Magic player loves kind of themed cards like this, and so I think that's just something that you have to consider, right? Like you're only considering this if you're in Dimir colors as well, plus other stuff. It's in good colors, so it's going to be something that you want to be able to slot in. And so this brings me into my third point, is that because you're already in black and blue, you're in a color pairing with amazing choices, right? Amazing choices for card draw, for putting things into the bin. And so this card, I think, and I'm going to say it now, I think this is a good choice, but it's not a great choice.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're looking at turn 1 and you have this and a fish or any of the other potential choices, those are easier to cast, and it'll have more long-term immediate value, right, for you. And I think that's a really hard thing for this card to kind of come up against. It's not that its effect isn't great, but like it's kind of is the color. Like I think if this was Golgari, I'm talking.
Oh, it's broken.
It's
so good.
So different.
For the decks that want it, for the Golgari decks, it would be so good. Yes,
because and you would see it more because those decks kind of need this effect a little bit more, right? It needs it a little bit more.
That's why we got to see a Soul Tide deck with Gitrog in the 99 with Psychic Frog.
Boom! Ooh.
That's the heat. That's
Magic.
The heat.
I hope you're listening.
I think I have a friend who might be actually brewing something similar to that. I might reach out after this.
Yeah, please do. Bring it back. Let me know.
Yeah. But talking about this point, I think we're bringing up a really good conversation, which is a dilemma I have as a CEDH brewer when it comes to being in blue. And the dilemma is there are so many damn good counter spells that I'm just like, like I could fit in 20 counter spells in my deck if I wanted to. There's probably 25 playable blue counter spells in the format. It's crazy. It's like even when you start getting down into the counter spells that are, let's say, less potent, the miscasts, the stern scoldings, those kind of area, like those are all playable cards in CEDH, and those are the kind of cards that Psychic Frog is going to fight with to get slots, right?
Yep.
And a lot of times, I think it's, as CEDH players, I'm not sure if it's because we have a 25% EV of winning the game, but when you get your ass kicked over and over again, you just kind of want more counterspells.
Yeah.
Is that something you feel? Because it's something I feel all the time. It's like, man, I just wish I had more interaction to stop these people from jamming turn 1 on Rogsai or turn 2 on Rogsai, and like I just need to be able to counter this stuff with my 1 mana pip or my 2 mana spell, so it's like I get that. I feel the need to want to play more counter spells or just more blue interaction pieces when you're in blue, because it's the best thing that you have. It's the powerful thing about being in the color pie. Do you kind of get that feeling that I'm talking about, where it's just like, man, sometimes it's just easier to jam more counter spells in your deck, or that's what you want, your desire?
I will take it a little bit step further and kind of like, well, my feeling in general is like, sometimes when I get to play with blue in my commander, like somewhere, the game just seems easier, right? Like it's like, it just seems so much easier. Like I can find my timing a little bit better. My win rate, I think, I haven't looked at this. I'm actually really curious now. My win rate when I play with blue, it just feels so much better. You feel like you have so much more control. And I think that's why I like the challenge of not. And so, no, I totally see what you're saying. I totally think that if I'm playing in blue and I'm looking at a card like this, or, like a Stern Scolding, or even a Stifle, right?
Spell Pierce.
Oh,
Stifle, that's spicy.
Stifle, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking at potentially those cards more than I am for another card that could draw me a card every so often, like once per my turn, right? 1 extra card. It's just really hard to compete with. Like, I can play any of these other cards. I'm already drawing cards because I'm in blue, and I'm running the 2 best card draw engines like you have, right? And if I'm playing in blue farm, I'm also got Tymna and Kraum in the command zone to do the same effect, but better. I was listening to a podcast today, and the 2 people were saying, like, Tymna Kraum can go literally 4 rounds and just not do anything. I'm going to draw, I'm going to pass. It's in blue. I don't even have to help fight for like keeping this game alive, right? I'm just going to pass priority. I'm going to let somebody else, I'm going to let the Tivit player, I'm going to let the Yuriko player like play their 20 counter spells. And then it's like, okay, you guys have all blown your load. I've drawn, only 6 or 7 cards. I win the game.
Only.
Right?
Only. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I feel it. And I also think that in the meta that we're currently in, because, okay, it's going to sound weird, because the meta is speeding up a little bit, I actually think it's inherently slowing down. And this is going to get Giga Brain, but it's because people are afraid to jam first.
Yeah.
So when you're afraid to jam first, the game goes longer, because let's say you have multiple turbo lists at the table, nobody wants to be the first one to jam. They're kind of like, can I get a turn 1 window for a jam, or can I get a turn 2 seat 1 or 2 jam? If not, I'm going to back off, wait for the other guy to go.
Unless you're one of those Rogsai players.
I mean, but even then, I feel like there's a lot more patience in this turbo meta. It's like everyone is able to jam at any given time.
At any time.
Because they can.
Because they can.
But they don't.
Yeah.
Because the good pilots are kind of realizing that it's quite beneficial to wait, because the mid-range and the control lists are kind of waiting and holding back on developing. We're not fully investing into their development to hold up the interaction to stop them. Right. There's a running joke in our play group where it's just like someone's always got a mind break trap, right? So you kind of are just like, you can't jam first. I got a mind break trap in my hand. You haven't seen it yet, right?
Yep.
It's like, you haven't seen me play it yet, so you obviously I have it. So
it's so true.
I definitely get the feeling we've kind of gone off on a crazy tangent now, and we haven't really. We're gonna bring it back into
here we come
to Psychic Frog here. But yes, being in Dimir, being in blue, it's going against some tough competition.
Very steep, right? Like every good commander in blue and black that has blue and black, those slots are already kind of like filled up, right? Like you're like literally like Psychic Frog is one of the last 2 kids on the playground. They're lined up still, and they're looking at Barb Servitor and Psychic Frog. And Psychic Frog's like, yeah, I got this. Kyle's gonna pick me for sure. Don't let me get over there with y'all.
I just imagine like at recess. Yep. You're playing basketball. You're picking teams.
Yep.
And there's somebody who's like 6 feet tall, and that's Psychic Frog. And then Barb Servitor is like 5 feet tall, and you know who's getting
Short
picked,
king.
and it's unfortunate, but you know. Shout out Barb Servitor. They're getting a lot of shout outs in this, this podcast. If you haven't listened to that episode, listeners, go back and listen to Barb Servitor. It's a great episode.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
That's fun. All right, Kyle, what point of mine did you like the most in terms of its downside?
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, since we went on a freaking 10-minute tangent about it, I think that the last point that you made, where like this card is just, it's a blue card. It's a blue-black card. Both of those colors are really freaking good, and it's going to be difficult for me to balance, okay, how many card draw engines do I want? How many counterspells / other good blue cards do I want? Okay, am I meeting the quota of each side? And if so, how can I fit Psychic Frog into this, right? And so just in general, the fact that it's going against all these great cards that we mentioned means that it's pretty limited. Like, you have to be in exactly a Dimir plus red breach line, right? So it's got to be Grixis plus.
Yeah.
Or you have to be in a Reanimator list. I really don't think that this can kind of hit all the points, right? Like, maybe Kenrith? I don't think Kenrith control plays breach lines, though. So never mind, scratch that. But anyway, I think that if you can be in a list with Underworld Breach, awesome. If you can be in a list that also reanimates stuff, double points. And if you can be in another list that also runs Delney, triple points.
Yep.
Other than that,
Kraum.
I think this... Tymna Kraum. So Tymna Kraum. But other than that, like, the window kind of narrows heavily because all of these other blue cards and black cards too, because we didn't really talk about that, but black has a lot of great cards as well. Because of that, it makes it difficult to fit in those that last couple of slots in your deck.
Yep.
All right, y'all. What point of mine did I make that you were like, sheesh, that's a good point. Why Psychic Frog is a good card.
It's your second point. It was about the discard effect is OP. I really do like that, right? I'm getting into a play style right now where I'm doing a lot of just graveyard shenanigans. And this card, I kind of wish it was like just black, right? Or just blue, right? So I can just play it in one of those color pairings with some other off colors that you don't see as much in terms of like different combos. I think that's the thing. Honestly, the other thing that I think is I'm gonna really quick jam is a small downside. It's for a 2-cost card, it almost does too much. Right? This is a card that if it only did one effect, maybe two, it would probably not eat a counterspell. But now it's drawing you cards, letting you discard, right? Like, and the thing, it may.
Oh no, there's no way it's eating a counterspell. There's no way.
Would you counter this? Leave a comment below, please. Leave a comment below.
No shot.
Let's see.
Shot.
But no.
Even if I'm sitting there with Stern Scolding and 2 other counterspells, I'm not countering somebody's Psychic Frog.
Yeah, that's true.
You can take that to the bank.
That's true. But yeah, I think that the discard effect is the understated, huge effect for me that I really like on this. More, even probably more than the draw, because if I'm already in blue and black, like I'm gonna rely on something else to draw my cards.
Yeah, and it's not linear either. So that's something else. Is like, as Jason was explaining this card to me and kind of telling me some of the great points about it, I was like, I didn't even think about that, but that's awesome that it can do that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I bet you there's going to be situations where you're going to catch people off guard where, you know, you're casting a breach and the people are like, casting a breach, there's no LED, there's nothing else in his hand, like there's nothing in his graveyard, like what's going on here, you know? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh shoot, they can fuel breach with Psychic Frog and start discarding their hand. Awesome, you know?
Yep.
So I think that it's because it's non-linear. I think it's pretty cool.
I think I agree. So I think that comes up to our last point.
All right, y'all. Did we do it? Is Psychic Frog a good card?
It's one of those cards that I think on paper, judging by my history, I absolutely would say yes. But the more we talked about it, because of its colors, I think it is a mid card.
Whoa.
It's a mid card that...
The M word?
Yeah, mid. It's mid.
You're hitting it with it?
I don't think it's... I'll definitely play around with this card. I'm going to try to slot it in for sure. It definitely does enough for me. And hopefully it surprises me a lot. Like, I'm really keen on trying this card out. But I can see it being in that 99th card slot that I try to cut out for like a Stifle or Stern Scolding instead.
Wow. All right, you heard it here, folks. Notorious yes man, has said that Psychic Frog ain't making the cut. Oof. I didn't expect that. Honestly, I thought that you would be like, you were really excited, but then I think that my 10-minute tangent on that
definitely helped. You were very convincing.
I did the opposite.
Sir.
No.
Yeah, you were very convincing.
Oh, no. Oh, it's my fault. I'm sorry, Jason, who recommended this card. I did you dirty by trying to, I got too into it.
He put on a TEDx talk, and I was here for it.
And you're like, Kyle, are you sure that you're not the devil's advocate today?
Good.
So it's time to get into our That's a Good Card ? Segment, which is an awesome segment where I'm going to be giving a obscure magic card to just the name of the card, and will be guessing all of its attributes, power, toughness, abilities, anything written on the card, and hopefully y'all can play along with us and guess this obscure magic card. Now, today's card was actually recommended to us by our patron, Yev. So thank you so much, Yev, for subscribing to our Patreon, as well as providing today's card. All right, you ready for today's card?
Absolutely.
All right, the name of the card is Brutal Suppression.
Brutal Suppression.
Pause now, listeners, and guess yourselves. Brutal Suppression.
Suppression. Oh my gosh, I thought I heard Brutal Depression. And
no, suppression with an S.
Okay.
Brutal Suppression.
I kind of want to say that, I'm getting real vibes of like the white color in this one, like Brutal Suppression. It sounds like a kind of almost like a ghostly prison type effect. Let's see, Brutal Suppression. I'm gonna say that it is a 1 white pip and 3 generic for an enchantment.
Okay. 4 cost. Ooh, okay, yeah.
That it's going to have some kind of effect like each player can only play 1 creature spell per turn. Actually, no, that's not right because white loves creatures, right? It's more about those non-creature spells. I take that back. I'm literally describing blind obedience or deafening silence. It's gonna be you can only activate your creature abilities once a turn. Ugh. I'm not convinced. 4 mana white enchantment that says you can only activate abilities of creatures once per turn. Dude, actually, this would make a great CEDH card.
All right. I don't know about that. 4 mana. What kind of image are we drawing here? What's the artwork looking like?
It's kind of ghostly looking. So lots of blues and whites and silvers. There is like a really big beast of some sort, like kind of like a lion, but like more magic-y. Let's just fantasy. And it's imprisoned. Lions. It's imprisoned, right? And it's actually kind of like cowered into a corner of that prison a little bit,
and it's being brutally suppressed.
Yeah, brutally suppressed.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. That's what I'm going with.
Flavor text? You got any flavor text for this brutally suppressed line?
No, I think that the image is enough. It doesn't need any
the picture.
And it doesn't need
it's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah, I was gonna go into really just dark places, so I'd rather not, and we're just gonna go with the picture.
Oh my god. Okay.
Brutal suppression. Yeah,
all right, let's talk about brutal suppression. Yeah. So you got one thing right. It's an enchantment.
Okay.
Round of applause.
Yeah.
Yay! So Brutal Suppression is a red
card. No.
It is 1 red pip for an enchantment that reads, activated abilities on rebel cards cost an additional sacrifice a land to play.
Okay, I feel like
so it did have to do with activated abilities, kind of.
Man,
that's
all right.
I'm going to take that. Activated abilities. Yeah. And then the flavor text reads,
rebel.
They no longer care about their own suffering. Show them something worse.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
Latula, Keldon Overseer.
Latula.
All right. And the artwork on this is like a humanoid thing standing in a rocky field
Oh.
with like light or fire. I'm not sure if it's light or fire, like blasting them.
Activated abilities on rebel cards.
I don't know else how to
Rebel
describe
cards?
it.
Rebel cards?
Yeah, rebel
Man.
cards. And quote from our patron Yev, apparently this is played in some rebel tribal decks.
That's pretty hot.
So shout out Brutal Suppression. Can't wait to
Sacrifice
draw
the
this
land.
one for our That's a Good Card artwork.
Oh boy. Oh boy. You got me good there. I'm not gonna lie. The name just really threw me. I completely pictured a white, like,
Caged Lion.
caged lion. Yep,
Apparently.
for sure.
All right, listeners, thank you so much for listening to today's episode on Psychic Frog. Thank you to Jason for recommending this card to us, and thank you to Yev for providing our That's a Good Card card for today. Please direct your attention to our link tree down below, which will have links to all the places we host our podcasts, whether it's YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and there's a new link down there to check out our Patreon. Thank you so much, and we will see you next Monday.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye!